So, as is the standard on my channel, this video was inspired by a Wall Street Journal article. This piece by Peggy Noonan was widely about the then ongoing strikes by the writers and actors in Hollywood, the former of which has been resolved as I'm writing this script. In her column, Ms. Noonan states, "Whatever your just criticism of its products, we want this storytelling industry to continue. You want it employing people who are trying and reaching. You want its art and the arts in general to flourish, because without them, we'd be less human, less whole." Upon reading that, the idea for this video was born. And as per usual, it marinated around in my brain for about 3 months before I actually got around to making it. Ms. Noonan doesn't delve into that idea that we need stories to be told, so that's what I'm here to do, at least in part. Why do we need stories? Why would the lack of them make us less human, less whole? Stories are something that we largely take for granted, that just kind of exist, that permeate our culture to the point that we don't even realize their importance because they are just so ubiquitous. The vast majority of people, at least in the first world countries, spend a large amount of their free time consuming stories, be they reality TV shows, epic multi-season dramas, or even sporting events that tell their own kind of story throughout each season, game, and era. We are absolutely inundated with stories. We learn from them. We are inspired by or cautioned by them. We demonstrate our unique, creative, imaginative ability by creating them. Practically as soon as we are able to understand language, we are held captive by our parents telling or reading stories to us. And from an early age, we begin to make up our own tales of heroism, adventure, or even tragedy. Plain and simple, humans love stories. They are an essential part of who we are. Without them, our very ability to communicate with each other would decay. We use stories in our daily lives to keep one another informed about how work was, what the kids have gotten up to, what happened at the bar last night. The most captivating conversationalists are those who have mastered the art of storytelling, who invite their listeners to engage and take part in the tale, who make others want to tell their own story with similar verve and energy. So, yeah, I'm on board with this idea. We do, in fact, need to continue telling stories to our fellow humans. Something so universal couldn't possibly be by coincidence, could it? I don't think so. Humans have been obsessed with the art of storytelling for millennia. Clearly, it's a part of us that just will not fade away, no matter the advances in technology or the method of delivering the story. Which is why I have to disagree on some level with Ms. Noonan's point that we want this storytelling industry to continue. Obviously, storytelling must go on in some fashion, but the art existed before Hollywood, and it will continue to exist after Hollywood. The industry as it exists today, that is, the various studios and the writers and actors guilds, do not have a monopoly on storytelling. Are they the predominant force in it? Arguably, but they are far, far from the only one. And if the monolith that is Hollywood gets taken down a peg, would that really be for the worst? But hold that thought for a moment, because I need to take a nap, which is possible even while staring straight into my ring light thanks to this video's sponsor, Manta Sleep. Did you know that you need to sleep? Turns out coffee isn't a suitable replacement. Go look it up. Sleeping is basically a restart for our brains. Just turn them off and back on again, and then everything begins to work. That's why Manta is proudly pro-nap. Naps give you energy, focus, strength, and clarity that you just can't get by pounding espresso. And light is absolutely terrible for sleep. We're inundated by light everywhere we look. But if I just slip on my Manta sleep mask, this is what I see. Manta's masks are designed to create 100% blackout and tell your body it's time to power down for a bit. They do this with soft, comfortable eye cups that fit your face naturally, don't leave any pressure on your eyes, and even allow you to open your eyes under the mask. Manta wants to give you a second morning through the power of naps, so go to the link in the description and use code SAMWISE to get a discount on for your order. Thank you so much to Manta for sponsoring, and now back to the video. There's no doubt in my mind that serious changes need to happen in the film industry, and we could talk for ages about what those changes should be, but that's not the point of this video. Rather, I'd like to propose this idea. If Hollywood collapses, imploding in on itself in its greed, avarice, and hubris, something else will simply fill that void. Now, I don't think Hollywood is actually going to turn to dust just because the studios and actors are arguing about who gets more money, but say for the sake of argument that it does evaporate into thin air next week. What happens? If you ask me, the answer is simple. We just go somewhere else to get our stories. Nothing new coming out on Netflix? Disney Plus is finally dead? Your local AMC theater turned into an unholy amalgamation of Auntie Anne's, Dairy Queen, and Sbarro? What are you going to do? Sit there in front of your TV, useless Roku stick in hand, wondering where it all went wrong? No, you're going to finally pick up War and Peace and actually read it this time, unlike in high school when you just read the Spark Notes. Or, more realistically, you're going to brush the dust off your gaming rig and finally start delving into that backlog before inevitably going back to Rocket League because it's been over 1,000 hours and you still can't hit aerials consistently. Putting jokes aside, in a world where Hollywood is a shell of its former self, if not totally annihilated, I think that the video game industry has an opportunity to instill itself into people's hearts as a trusted provider of stories. Do I think that video games will ever overtake film and television in terms of popularity? No, for one simple reason. Video games require some level of effort, whereas with TV, all you have to do is sit there and keep your eyes open. Humans are always going to prefer the lazier option when push comes to shove. However, video games have certainly proven themselves to be excellent storytellers. Games like God of War, The Last of Us, the Halo series, to name but a few, provide incredible stories with rich world building and characters. If you just played all the cutscenes of some of these games, you could make a reasonably good movie, albeit with a few gaps to fill in. That being said, video games are not limited to telling their stories through these pre-rendered cutscenes that every player will experience in exactly the same way. Having an active party in the story allows developers to let one player experience a given game's story in a vastly different way than another player might. For example, the story of Subnautica, revealed through audio logs, radio transmissions, and other clues scattered throughout the vast water world, is likely not going to be discovered in identical fashion by any two given players. Beyond that, even games not of the strictly narrative variety still have a story inherently baked into them because of the experience of the player. Strategy games like XCOM do have a story, but the real narrative is largely driven by what happens during missions, not the cutscenes in between. XCOM players love their soldiers. They are attached to them.
Once you name it, you start getting attached to it.
And the story of each of their troops has the potential to turn heroic or tragic at any given moment, depending on the whims of the almighty RNG. There are dozens of other examples you could throw out there. Plenty of games, anything by FromSoft for example, have incredibly rich and deep lore, and plenty of story if you actually pay attention to the brief cutscenes and read item descriptions. But ultimately, the story of your Elden Ring playthrough was more about how you finally triumphed over Margit, rose to incredible heights of strength and skill, and then got repeatedly stomped into the ground by the draconic tree sentinel who for some reason is 5 times harder than the boss whose door he's guarding. Heck, there's even a story in games like Rocket League, where the tale of each match, the ebb and flow of the goals and saves, will often stick in our brain after a particularly memorable comeback or an agonizing defeat. All that to say is that the greatest storytelling power that video games have is that they involve us, the consumer, in telling that story. The enhanced level of engagement can provide a deeper connection than is often found for viewers of movies or shows. However, as already noted, that level of engagement requires effort, and effort is not something that human beings like to expend if we can avoid it, hence the narrower popularity of games versus things you can just sit there and watch. Also, video games, even ones that are especially story-rich, are filled with lots of non-narrative gameplay, in which the player moves the character from A to B and encounters enemies, puzzles, challenges, and, plays the game. This is necessitated due to the fact that consumers paid for a video game and not a movie, and that generally video games are quite a bit longer than our movies. This is another divide between Hollywood and the gaming industry. Gamers expect to get a lot more minutes per dollar out of their game than do moviegoers. But is there a way to bridge this gap? Well, for one thing, let's note that not all of Hollywood's products are 3 hours or less in length. There are plenty of TV shows that eclipse the length of the average video game in terms of runtime, so maybe the length divide isn't really an issue. That being said, is there a market for games that might only be a few hours in length, whose runtime would make their experience similar to that of going to see a movie? Quite possibly. Stray, a game made by fewer than 30 people and only about 5 hours in length, blew away expectations by selling over 2 million copies and reaching approximately twice that many people on PlayStation's subscription service. Now obviously, the shorter length would command a significantly lower price point than the whopping $60 commanded by big releases nowadays. But what if those few hours of story could be played again, repeated, giving the player a new version of the tale that they just witnessed? This is the portion of the video where I'm just going to throw out ideas for you guys to tear apart in the comments. What if each decision a player made led them down a different path, each of which had its own unique cutscenes, voice lines, etc., and the story all wraps up in 2 or 3 hours, but the game could be replayed a dozen times without repeating the same sequence of events. Does a game like that already exist? Is Baldur's Gate 3 at all like that? I mean, I know the story itself is incredibly long, but do events throughout the game play out in vastly different ways depending on the choices you've made, or are players more or less funneled down the same main story path? I don't know, I haven't played it yet. A game like I'm suggesting could be dominated by cutscenes and more of a choose your own adventure style, or it could play out more through environmental storytelling and the evolvement of the world based on the choices you make. I think Silent Hill Ascension is meant to be something like the former. From what I understand, it'll premiere an episode a week and then let the community vote on what happens next to some extent. I assume that means there will be scenes or even whole episodes that they'll write, film, and edit that will go unused, so I wonder if they'll figure out that's just not worth it. The concept seems interesting, but to me, the idea of having everyone see the same show seems like a missed opportunity. Why not show each group of people what would have happened based on what they voted for? Let them compare with fans who picked a different option, and then once the show is all done, release all of it, each branching path for everyone to enjoy. I don't know, maybe Ascension and the ideas that I've been throwing out are trying too much to please two audiences, and thus will end up making no one happy. But I do genuinely believe that the downfall or even just the decline of Hollywood is an opportunity for creators in the gaming industry to step up, to demonstrate that they too can tell meaningful, impactful stories that will win the hearts of audiences and leave a lasting legacy. How much of the disgruntled post Hollywood audience can video games capture? Certainly not all of it. There is and always will be a need for us to simply be told stories, especially by master craftsmen who have created the likes of Band of Brothers, Breaking Bad, Avatar The Last Airbender, and so many other brilliant stories. I don't think video games can replace these types of sagas. Some tales simply demand that we observe from the outside, experiencing the rich narrative tapestry being woven in front of our eyes. Naturally, there is, of course, a place for both types of stories, those that require our participation and those that only need our attention. But perhaps the former, in this chaotic age of struggling movie theaters and streaming services, is in a good position to introduce itself to an audience that has long ignored its storytelling potential. What do you think? Will Hollywood collapse entirely? Can video games win over people who have never picked up a controller? What is your favorite gaming story? If you had to introduce someone who loves good stories to the gaming industry, what video game would you pick? Whatever your thoughts, let me know. I'm excited to hear them. I hope you guys enjoyed this kind of musing, exploratory video, and I will see you in the next one.